Directed by Ryan Prose, we are talking Night Patrol, and this one stars Jermaine Fowler, Justin Long and CM Punk, among others. Now this is a kind of a action gangland vampire movie where we have vampire cops versus gang members. Initially I was expecting this to be a little bit like the movie Full Eclipse that starred Mario Van Peebles, which had werewolf cops. And there's some similarities, I suppose, but it's kind of quite different in tone and actual content. So the story initially focuses on two cops. Jermaine Fowler is a cop, but he has come from more of a gangland life. His brother and kind of mother are still involved in it. And then Justin Long's character, Hawkins, is like a legacy cop, but his father was a renowned policeman. And Justin Long's character gets kind of promoted to this night patrol. Little does he know that they're actually vampires, this kind of special unit. And they are kind of white supremacists. They basically kind of want to wipe out the black neighborhood in kind of a gentrification kind of style massacre. And then we have our sort of gang type characters, obviously trying to fend off these attacks and using sort of tribal methods to defeat the ancient threat of vampires. So let's discuss. So this movie has some reasonable production value. So if we go for the positives first, it's you know, it's obviously it's got quite a lot of cast. There is quite a lot of characters in the movie, so it has a big cast. You have some recognisable names here, you know, some character actors, and I say you've got CM Punk from the wrestling, a few other kind of like recognisable faces. So they've obviously spent a reasonable amount of money on the production here, and I do think it shows. And I do think some of the action sequences are relatively kind of well handled. And I will say as well, the movie has these kind of moments of violence that are kind of punctuated through the film that seem pretty, I would say, shocking to it in a way, because there's in this movie there's a variety of like executions which I feel kind of come out of nowhere. You're not quite expecting these characters to be gunned down in cold blood and executed in such a kind of like a brutal fashion, and it's both sides, to be honest. So at times it comes across as quite a kind of a hard movie in some respects, because human life tends to be somewhat sort of throwaway. Now, if you like a movie with a message, I think this film is clearly sort of trying to say something about racial tensions in America, particularly with the police. I will say there's quite an amusing tagline, "Defang the police," in this movie, which I thought was actually quite a clever tagline, to be honest with you, with the whole defund the police movement that happened a few years ago. So there's some interesting elements depending on your point of view, and I do think the movie has this kind of grey sort of morality where I think there's really no actual sort of good guys in this, I would say. So it's trying to have these sort of morally complex sort of characters, and that's an interesting choice, but it's a choice that I think is a bit of a double-edged sword. So there's an interesting kind of like film here, I think, buried in it, with some as I say, moments of violence that seem kind of quite punctuated. There's some sort of different take on vampire mythology. So why do I sound sort of hesitant with this? I think the movie has some interesting ideas, but I think the execution is actually fairly poorly handled. let me kind of just go into it a little bit more why I say this. I think the vampire mythology and just the kind of like supernatural mythology as a whole here is really quite shoddily done. We don't know really anything about these vampires, how long they've been here, if there are any other vampires, is it just this police, how did it start, what their actual powers are. I mean, they seem to be effectively immortal, but we don't really know outside of that what if the traditional sort of trappings will work. So it's kind of really vague about the sorts of the vampires. They don't appear to have fangs in the traditional sense of a vampire, but we do see kind of more of a Blade 2 style, the jaw opening up a little bit later. But they wear kind of like fake metal fangs, you know, because they don't want to get their teeth into black people. So there's obviously, we'll come into the kind of the race politics of it again in a minute. But I think the actual sort of the vampire mythology is murky here. But just in more general terms, I think the supernatural element, it seems to be kind of like, it's not really clear like how many people know about it, because it appears that it's somewhat of an open secret that there are these vampires. But then we have some of these gang members talking about like lizard men and shapeshifters. So I'm thinking, so what is the mythology of this world that we're in? Is there a variety of other kind of supernatural things that are lurking around? And certain people seem to know about vampires, but not everything, or some people know nothing about them. It's really unclear. The world building here, I've got to say, I think is not good, because it just feels like half baked. Now, I've kind of mentioned the whole kind of like racial issues that this movie kind of brings up, and yes, that's very much at the forefront. I've got to say, it feels a little bit heavy-handed with that. I think if you don't like messaging in your movie, this is not going to be a movie that's particularly sort of going to appeal to you in that respect. And I do think, although there's obviously trying to make commentary on troubles in America, certainly with that, you know, that is felt between certain communities and police, for example, it's clearly trying to comment on that, but it's done in such a heavy-handed way that I think it sort of threatens to overshadow it and make this seem somewhat exploitative to a degree. So there's that. Now, the main issue for me is what the actual narrative is here, because the movie kind of has this story where we are following these two policemen, Justin Long's character and Jermaine Fowler's character. But I'm going to say this: if you were to remove those characters from this film, the film plays out exactly like it would have anyway. Those characters are sort of completely immaterial to what actually happens in the actual plot, such as the plot is. So, although this movie positions up these two characters, you know, you've got one who comes from, you know, his father was a decorated police officer, and he gets kind of like indoctrinated in this kind of vampire sort of sect, so to speak. And then the other one, Jermaine Fowler's character, is coming up from the streets and all that. You take these characters out of it, it doesn't change what happens. You know, they may as well not be in there. So they're completely ineffectual characters. So it seems such an odd choice that this film has these two characters as the protagonists to a point, and then they have no impact on the actual sort of story. But even within that, it's not really clear like what's actually going on. Like with Justin Long's character, it's not really clear what his motivations are. Like, we learn that he has suspicions that this night patrol is up to no good. So we think, okay, so he's sort of the de facto protagonist, perhaps. But then we see him execute someone, and then when he becomes a vampire, it's unclear whether he's trying to kind of like fight back or if he's just kind of going on like a rampage and kind of killing anyone. It's really sort of unclear. And then Jermaine Fowler's character, you know, it's like, what has led him to this place where he's kind of like abandoned his family and become a police a policeman against the wishes of his family, who are still in the kind of the gang culture. And it's really unexplored. So I gotta say, I think this movie is a real mess in regards to its characters and its actual plot. And the plot is relatively like simple, and it's just and it's a bit stupid. Like, we have this night patrol, but they just seem like barbarians who want to kind of like wipe out this particular neighbourhood. And thinking, well, surely there's going to be like reporters and things like this, and other like, I mean, yes, they're vampires, right? And they look down upon this particular community, right? Fine, but just the wider picture, it just doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, they're literally like firebombing this place. I mean, there'd be like, you know, there'll be so many like other emergency services, like fire brigade, and it just doesn't make any sense to me. I think this movie is so ill-judged in regards to actual kind of like sense. It's just silly. And then we have the ending of this movie where it turns into like a superhero movie, where we have, who I guess is the real protagonist, this particular kind of like gang member, who is the brother of Jermaine Fowler's character, kind of dons this kind of African tribal garb to become like a superhero. It's really silly. So it's just a kind of a bit of a mess, to be honest. I think it has elements where the production looks good, and like I said, I think it's punctuated with some fairly sort of shocking scenes, but the actual story around it, the characters around it, are just weak. And just on a personal note, I'm from the UK. I found it quite hard to understand some of the dialogue in this movie. There's lots of, you know, N-bombs and kind of like gang speak and stuff. I was struggling to understand a lot of this, to be honest. Lots of colloquialisms and stuff, and to me it was kind of, I'm understanding maybe half of this dialogue. Maybe that's just a personal thing. I won't judge the movie necessarily on that, but yeah, just as a kind of aside, really. So overall, I think this movie is a massive waste of potential, if I'm honest. It just seems like some of the production had elements of being interesting, and there's some interesting elements within the story, but its execution is just poor. I'm going to give this a 3 out of 10 because I think this movie, you know, it has moments of looking good, but that's what makes it more of a shame, is that it clearly had a reasonable budget and some good, you know, production value and set pieces, but it's just a wasted of an opportunity, which is maybe worse than a cheap movie, like a B movie that just can't afford to do things. This one probably could. So it's a 3 out of 10 for me. It's a pretty poor film, I've got to say. Have you seen it? What were your thoughts? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.